Anyway, all right. So, I'm going to talk about the one thing that improved your brewing, or generally just sort of improved your brewing, but we'll do one at a time. And I'm just really going to have to pick on people as we go. But as we're talking, feel free to sort of jump in and add into whatever people are saying. That doesn't take away your one thing. So as I said earlier on, I imagine we've got quite a bit of overlap and things where we think in people's improvements. So the idea is really just have a discussion and pick up on each other's points and yeah, see if people can find other ways to improve their brewing. So I'm going to start, and for me, the one thing that most massively improved my brewing was joining lab, of course. And I'm not even just saying that just for the fun of it. It genuinely did revolutionize my brewing, because before then I'd had people when they tasted beer go, "Oh yeah, it's great," and now I realize actually quite often my beer was oxidized sometimes. So it definitely had some issues. And joining lab and the brutal honesty that I got from having beers tasted there, never said in any nasty way or anything like that, just purely the truth of what the beer really was, helped me identify problems in my brewing setup and just completely change my brewing. Yeah, it just completely changed it straight away. Tightened up the processes that I had and made a huge difference to the way I was brewing, and haven't looked back since. And that's obviously led me on to other things as well. But I'm gonna not say any more about them. Yeah, and just in case other people are going to say those points, yeah, I guess it's kind of. Has anyone else had any benefits of sort of joining lab apart from the wonderful social occasions and tasting lots of great beer?
Tasting other homebrewers' beers when you're a newbie was like, oh my God, I've got a way to go. I thought mine were just fine. And you're right, your mates go, oh, that's nice, dear. But turning up at lab, I think my first time at lab was when Rich Conroy was chair, and he brought in a plum porter, and I was like, oh, okay. I think I had plum porter in the pub the other day, that Titanic one or something like that. It was amazing. It's like, oh my God, this is like a different world. And then tried a couple of other people's at lab as homebrew beers, and then very quickly realized that anyone could have been selling them commercially if they wanted to, because the standard was right up there. And that's kind of what raises your game as well, makes you want to learn a bit more. So that in my first week.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, like you can read stuff on the internet and everybody has an opinion on how to make good beer, but you've not tasted any of their beers, so you don't actually know whether what they're saying holds any weight.
It works for me.
Yeah, I've never had a problem. You don't know if they're basically a vinegar brewery or something like that. It's
yeah, my beer tastes all right.
Yeah, you don't know whether the advice they're giving you is terrible or great, really. So it's yeah, just another way.
Now, I've got to echo that as well, James. I mean, being part of a social outfit where you can critique other people's beers objectively, and you get honest feedback. I mean, bearing in mind, because I'm one of the early guys in the days of lab, and we had Jeff Cooper come along most months to the group. So a mine of information like that is like worthless. It's completely priceless, isn't it? So, and he really would sort of give you proper feedback and give you all the pointers. Okay, yeah, this beer is good in one respect, but you could improve it by doing this, and this, etc. And yeah, absolute, without any shadow of a doubt, having this whole sort of mind hive of all this information and knowledge between all of us. Yeah, any newbie coming along, you can't fail to improve your beers if you sort of join the group and sort of take heed of what everybody's saying.
I think for me as well, it's not so much even just improving your beers, it's actually just expanding your knowledge. I've come in having made a couple of small beers at home and not much else, and suddenly I've been exposed to a much wider plethora of different beers. I didn't know half of them a year ago. So my knowledge base has expanded hugely over the last 9-10 months, and really given me that much more to get my teeth into and really move on with. So it's given me grist for the mill, if you like, to challenge myself and go further into it.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, I mean, whilst I've not been able to come to the in-person meets, but the sheer amount of knowledge I've learned of everybody else, just just coming to like the onlines, the meetings, and obviously just being able to ask questions in like the Slack side of things. Just my knowledge has just gone over the past year or so. It's been amazing.
I guess it's the Slack in that way is actually quite useful because you can line that up and see sort of who's doing good stuff either on Slack, but also then competitions and things like that. You can see who's brewing the award-winning beers and things like that. So there's you know that sort of when people are saying something, whether they're talking, well, yeah, that what they're doing really does work for them. Cool. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that interested me and kind of looking out for this group was just finding out what other people do in terms of water chemistry, because that's one of the ones that I feel like I've struggled to crack, kind of, and being all from roughly the same area. London water does have some similarities, might be different a little bit, East London versus West London, but is that something you all have a kind of shared bank of sort of specifics about, or is that brewer's secrets? I know some people quite hold that close to their chest.
Yeah, does anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I first when I was first looking up London water, I think it was the article on the lab website that that was the first time I'd ever encountered lab. In fact, was looking up how to deal with London water. And there's that quite useful guide on the lab website for a start.
Yeah,
Okay, I haven't actually seen that one.
Yeah,
I mean,
a video on YouTube as well. James did a good presentation on it sometime last year, I think, as well.
I was thinking that.
Okay.
I thought I know I've done more than one presentation on water treatment. Yeah, it's a complex subject and is one of the last things you need to worry about, apart from using metabisulfite to remove chloramine from your water. That's the one thing I would always do, and the rest is extremely optional until your brewing is up to a good standard, because water treatment, lack of it won't make your beer bad, but it can take a good beer up to the next level. But equally, there's a lot of different ways of doing it. I don't want to go into the whole thing about water treatment right here, but it's something we can. I'll send you an invite to the Slack and chat area and stuff like that. So maybe if you want to ask that on there, we can then have a sort of bit more of an in-depth discussion about it. Otherwise, I'll end up speaking about water treatment for the next hour.
Yeah, it's one of those topics not of interest to everybody, and sometimes you get a bit overly technical about it. But I think actually one of the things that would be probably worth a chat at some point, rather than just kind of messages back and forth. I think, like, knowing the quantities is one thing of like this, I'm gonna add this much, whatever. But I find like sometimes sequencing it throughout the brew day, like I have got mash pH off by adding it and testing it too quickly after, or not waiting until it kind of actually, or maybe my pH reading's not quite on, whatever. But I just find that I sometimes it's not just the quantities, but it's actually sometimes the methods, which I think is hard to do unless you're learning it with somebody side by side or chatting it through with somebody. But we can leave that for another time. Then it's not
Yeah, I think if we leave it, and we'll maybe tackle that towards the end of the meeting, just then we can sort of talk away about it without sort of scuttling the rest of the meeting. Yeah, happy to talk about that then. So does anybody else want to volunteer anything for something that improved their brewing? If not, I will pick somebody at random. Go on then, Darren's got his hand up.
Yeah, BJCP training. Yeah. As with joining lab, yeah, everyone you talk to, oh yeah, that beer's good. Like my first few beers all had the same sort of taste to them. Even though I was brewing a wheat beer, a bitter, something else, they all had this twang to it or something. And yeah, identified in the first couple of months of coming to lab, but yeah, just doing the BJCP training, I can identify faults in beers a lot better, have a better understanding of like if I ever do competitions, like what you're sort of aiming for the style guides and stuff like that. But it was just interesting as well to like do lots of different styles of beer. And hello, Lily.
Funnily enough, that was my becoming a BJCP judge was my number 2 thing that has improved my brewing. Yeah, so I completely agree with that. Go on, Peter.
Well then, I've got 2, but I'll save one for later, and I'm really torn between which one's the most important. The thing that, well, my number 1A is actually measuring accurately the volume of your brewing copper in particular, because I use a single vessel system, but it's equally applicable to HLTs, but it's all related to the same thing. It is so important to make sure that you've got the correct volume before you start the boil, because then you get the repeatability, providing you've got decent control over your temperature of the boil. You then got control over what your gravity is going to be, all other things being equal. So rather than just rely on the measurements that are marked, my key thing was to actually, I had a 2-liter jug, and rather than rely on those measurements engraved on the side, just a plastic mug, I weighed it. So 2 liters is 2 kilos. Water's, a little bit of temperature difference, but that's neither here nor there probably. So the mark on the jug was 5 mil. What's that in old money? About quarter inch out. So I then used my calibrated measuring jug, and I put 2 liters at a time into my brewing vessel, and calibrated a dipstick. So I knew exactly what my initial strike water volume was. That helps with determining the correct strike temperature for your mash, because you've got the grain, you know more or less what the grain temperature is going to be, probably ambient, and then you're hitting the right value for converting your goods in your mash, and then you can work through your boil, and after a couple of brews you know exactly how far you're boiling off, whether you need to adjust your boil duration or intensity, and what that gives you is repeatability. So, and that all stem from correct measurement of the volume of the vessel by calibrating against a known standard. So that for me made a huge difference, and I'm talking well 1 or 2 years ago now, but it was something that improved the consistency of my brewing. So that was 1A. I'll save 1B until I get an permission.
Sure, we'll come back around to you. Has anybody got any comments on that sort of the accuracy and measurability of things?
I always try and I weigh my water in.
How do you do that on like big scales or?
Yeah, I've got a, like it measures up to 150 kilos. So I stick the grain father on that, weigh in all the water that I'm going to use for the brew, heat it all up to mash temp, chuck my salts in. And then I've got a little HLT that I'll put that on the scale and then weigh out, pump out the sparge water into that and save it for later.
I go a slightly different route, and I don't have a dipstick. Well, I kind of have a dipstick. I have a steel ruler, a long steel ruler, and I know for my hot liquor tank and for my kettle, what measurement equals what volume, because I did the same as Peter and added essentially 2 liters at a time, weighed out. So I then noted down the measurements for each one, and so now I know like I think it's like sort of my pre-boil for 27 liters. What I normally aim for is let's see, it's 292 millimeters. It's pretty accurate. One day I will actually do a proper dipstick or something like that, so I don't have to then look it up and figure out exactly what volume I've got based on the measurement. But just another way of doing it.
Mine's a piece of flat aluminium that I have etched, which I've, because it's soft enough, with the edge of a screwdriver, I've marked it. So
Yeah, I guess in theory, really, all I need is a bit, and then I can just mark like pre-boil, post-boil, and then that's about it, really.
I was surprised how much difference that makes, like accurately measuring the volumes. Because even a few years ago, I think I would kind of round it up. Instead of doing 23 liters, I'd do 25 liters or something, just because it felt like the maths would be easier to work out. But then I probably didn't remeasure everything else, like the water salts, or change the IBUs or something like that. And you're right, Peter, it would come out just different enough each time that it was quite frustrating that I wasn't getting a repeatable beer, because the source recipes were coming from different places, so I was scaling them differently, and then putting them into an inconsistent system of my own. And sometimes it'd be too bitter, sometimes it'd be too this or that or something, and it's really frustrating because beer takes a while. It's not like a cake where you find out that afternoon whether it's worked or not, or bread or something. But it takes you 5-6 weeks to find out whether your beer has succeeded or not sometimes. But yeah, like baking, the science of it, the accurate measurements of it, I found once I nailed that, did make me relax a bit more.
well, if you're going to vary, I'm terrible. I vary multiple variables at the same time because, hey, I'm a home brewer. But the volume one is one that I've got a PID controller, so I know what it's going to do in terms of pre-boil to post-boil, and then I can fiddle with everything else. But if I want to actually make the same thing again, I'd be pretty sure I'd be very close.
Yeah, I've very recently got the mash pH or the pH accurate all the way through the mash post boil by nailing the volumes and nailing not only the recipe but the process a bit better, but mainly the volumes. I think I realized I had got them slightly off, and it was making enough of a difference that it was running up the wall. But now it's fine. Now it's good, it's repeatable, and I'm getting what I expected, which is, yeah, breathe a sigh of relief. but it makes a difference. It makes a real difference.
I mean, I guess if you're rounding up from 23 to 25 litres, you kind of potentially diluting the beer by 10% or so. So imagine you going at sort of trying to aim for your 1055 beer and it starts at 1050 instead. Equally, IBUs, you're sort of maybe at 45, you're now at 40 IBUs, that sort of thing. So it does make and I've been told in the past beers, oh, you just need to make it 10% more bitter or something like that. So it does make a difference.
I think the issue I found with it was I was measuring everything and trying to find, aiming for what all the predicted values were. But when I was finding I was a couple of points off here, there, or like 3 or 4 points here and there, then the compensating for it by either adding some DME or like boiling it for a bit longer or chucking some more hops near the end or something like that to try and, recalibrate the silly thing, was also obviously knocking it off because you're doing it on the fly a bit in a slight panic. But as you say, if you nail it from the beginning and you know what your inputs are supposed to be, then the outputs become a lot more predictable or a lot more saleable, by the way.
Who wants to go next?
If I can follow that up with
Yeah.
I think the thing that sort of improved my brewing the most, although I would confess I haven't cracked it yet, is fermentation temperature control. That's, I think, I basically initially started off exclusively brewing beers I could get away with letting it free rise, Belgians, and that's great, if you want so really fruity esters and everything like that, and that worked for a while. But I think, managing the fermentation temperature, which has been hard because I don't have any kind of device to do that with, right? I'm just going to choose the right room. Basically, or choose the right area of the outside that's sort of relatively consistent, but I think that makes the biggest difference in terms of brewing to style, and I was most happy with that with this Munich drink I did most recently, which was under pressure, so that was kind of a little bit of a safety valve there as well. Obviously pressure fermentation is a little bit different.
What difference do you think it made to having fermentation temperature control?
Well, so I historically have always had a massive problem with over attenuation. Every beer that I've done, is, aside from that Munich Dunkel, has been under 1008 probably, and I just have kind of embraced it, right? So this is my Berliner Weiss. I was saying that I brewed recently, and it's basically, I mean, it's a kind of borderline sour beer, right? It's very dry, bit lactic, and a bit over sour. And it's nice. I mean, I actually like that style of beer. I don't like sweet beers at all. But I think, I always struggle with over attenuation, which is weird because when you read a lot of these sort of forums, I don't know, maybe it's just what I read, but it seems like everybody has the opposite problem of stalled fermentation and something like that, which I literally always go bone dry in my beers. So I'd be interested to hear anybody's sort of recommendations on that. But I think what I've read recently is that kind of variability in fermentation temperature also leads to over attenuation. And I think that's something I hadn't really thought about too much. I thought, oh well, if it gets too high, you get more esters or something like that. But I hadn't really thought about it increasing the attenuation when you kind of go through different temperature cycles, which is I'm totally guilty of. I basically don't try very hard to control temp, or haven't historically tried to control fermentation temp.
And that leads into the previous point as well around sort of accuracy, measuring, control, gives you the repeatability. So yeah, if you can do that, then it helps you with the repeatability when you're brewing in future.
If you've got a big garage, then Facebook Marketplace is your friend. You can go and get yourself a massive old larder fridge for free and use that.
The
That's what I
first
did.
beer I did at mine was back in February 2018, and we had that beast from the east, and I didn't have any way of temperature controlling at the time. I don't think I had central heating, so it was about -11, and see, the beer didn't ferment. So I'd say that's probably what made the biggest difference to me was yeah, having a fridge that I could temperature control with yeah, there's sort of Dimplex tubular heater and a XTC controller, but yeah, that made a huge difference because yeah, otherwise when it was cold, I just wouldn't have been able to make certain beers. It wasn't fermenting.
Well, I think on the fermentation control, it's the fact that the yeast doesn't like being stressed, going up and down in wild temperature changes. So consistency again seems to be the key with the control of the fermentation.
Definitely. I think if even if like halfway through fermentation, the temperature in the room drops by a couple of degrees, that just kills your attenuation and you end up with a overly sweet beer. I think this was top of my list, temperature control, like Joe was saying, cheap fridge off eBay, a larder fridge because you got extra shelves in the top for a couple of bottles, and an Inkbird kit. So for under 50 quid, with any luck, you could probably successfully do lagers and or any other beer, really.
I think we got 3 of our 4 fridges off Free Cycle, where they were just totally free. We just went and picked them up.
Yeah, they're amazing.
Have you guys got go-to kind of colder weather beers that you tend to do?
No,
I'm just asking because that's my next you know thing. I'm thinking of doing like a cream ale, like a cream ale is sort of like it's sort of an American style, I guess, but it's similar to like a common Kentucky common, California common. Tends to be cold,
Yeah, I mean,
fermenting, I think.
with that sort of thing, you can brew sort of colder. If it's cold, and you can, I mean, generally getting something colder is harder than getting something warm. At least with a cold, you can stick a sort of cheap heat belt on it or something like that, and with a temperature controller, like an Inkbird, then that's much easier than sometimes than having space for a fridge.
If you were looking for style, as you were saying, brew something that's tolerant, go for a Kvike yeast perhaps. If you know that it's going to be warm, it's going to be a problem. But
no, I'm saying the opposite. I think it's
the opposite.
It's cold.
It's too cold.
Yeah, well, I mean,
A heat belt, or a pad underneath your fermentation. I mean, that would do the cold bit. If just trying to keep the thing above a temperature, yeah, a heat belt or a pad.
Yeah, I'm looking at any recommendations people have for one of those. I mean, I've looked on various places. I don't know, like where I've looked on eBay, but if anybody has any recommendations for particular ones that are cheap and that sort of thing. I mean, I know there's different types of solutions, like a pad that goes underneath, or one that you wrap around it. I'm not quite sure what's the best idea.
It depends how cold you want to go, because lager yeasts obviously ferment quite cool. So this time of year, anything lagerish.
And there's no reason why you can't do something with a lager yeast, and I mean, you can make an IPA with a lager yeast if you want to. So yeah, or as you said, sort of cream ale or anything. There's plenty of styles you can make that way. There's no reason why you can't like ferment a stout with a lager yeast.
Yeah,
there's a challenge.
Cool. Yeah. So
the interesting thing I noticed with the temperature, I mean, I'm only just starting to get my temperature control under handle, as it were. But the one thing I did notice this time was because I'm now actually able to monitor the beer throughout fermentation with an ice spindle, was just how much difference in temperature there was from just the fermentation. The room temperature didn't change, but the fermentation kicked it up about 3.5 degrees, which I was quite shocked at. Wasn't expecting that much difference in temperature from it. Should have known about it, should have thought about it, but it was only when I actually saw it the other day that from the graphs and everything, oh, crikeys, yeah, I hadn't even thought that might be a case, but.
Oh, you mean as the temperature of the fermentation, the temperature that's actually created by the process itself?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I use the brew pilers thing to monitor my fermentation, and so you can see on the bottom of the graph when the heater or the fridge has been on, and as the fermentation kicks in, you can see that the fridge starts. This is when it's trying to maintain a constant temperature. You can see the fridge kicking in, and then as the tail end of fermentation, the heater starts to come in because I'm probably going above ambient, sort of. But so yeah, you can definitely see the effect of that. So the cooling's coming on because of the rise in temperature, which would otherwise be a free rise. Yeah.
Mm.
Anybody got something else they want to share about improving their brewing? Who's not been yet?
Sure. I'll talk
Go
about
on, Les.
Yeah, I'm going to pick on something that I thought maybe other people wouldn't pick on, and that is keg hopping. For hoppy beers, I used to struggle with aroma. I always got good flavour from the hops, but always struggled if I was doing beer swaps or entering competitions. They never had the aroma that they needed. They were never punchy enough. And one day I completely forgot to dry hop beer, and it wasn't only not aromatic. It was kind of completely dead. So I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose here. I'm going to put some hops in the keg and just see what happens. And it was a bit of a revelation for me that beer not only got back some life, but it was probably the most aromatic beer I'd ever brewed. And so that was the origin of my beer butterfly effect, because this little thing made such a big difference for me. And so now I keg hop pretty much all of my hoppy beers, and they usually in beer swaps or competitions get a comment about how aromatic they are. So that kind of vindicates the keg hopping as an effective tool, actually. People have asked about whether it's grassy, and the answer is yes. For the first couple of weeks, it's grassy, but the grassiness, contrary to what you see and hear a lot, is that the longer the hops are in the beer, the more grassy it gets. That's not been my experience with keg hopping. It's grassy to start with, and then that fades. It fades over a couple of weeks or so, and then it's not anywhere near as grassy anymore. And then you just get more of the hop aroma. So that's among 100 improvements. One that I'm going to pick on for tonight is keg hopping.
So is that in a corny keg or a sort of, yeah, okay. And
yes, in a corny keg. I use those little kind of stainless steel hop spiders.
Mm-hmm.
They're about 7 centimeters long and 18 tall. I just dangle it with a bit of fishing line from a lug that's in the lid, on the lid of the corny keg. And it just dangles just above the top of the bottom of the keg.
Is that pellets or whole leaf?
Leaf, because I don't want to get hop debris stuck in the poppets and stuff. I'm a bit
that's what I was
paranoid about that.
wondering. Yeah.
And you leave the hops in the keg the entire time you're drinking it?
Yeah, throughout. So that can be several weeks.
Have you considered using a hop randle, Les?
A hop randle?
Mm.
Like
so you dispense from the keg, and in between the line between the keg and the tap, you have your hops.
No, I haven't tried that. I don't think I haven't got a hop wrangle, and I don't think I've tried or thought about trying that as an approach. No. Is it something you've tried, and does it work? I imagine that you might
Well,
get some grassiness from that.
I bought a hop bong from Kegland, and there's a myriad of different things you can use it for. And one of the things I'm thinking potentially using it for is a hop wrangle. So, but I haven't used it yet.
Right. Yeah, I've not heard of that one, I'm afraid. So that's a bit of a new one on me.
Why do you think that your dry hopping in the fermenter was unsuccessful?
Because when I submitted beer into competitions, I always got comments that it needed more aroma. The aroma was not hoppy. It would be malty. It'd be any number of things, but it wouldn't be very hoppy. It wouldn't be very aromatic.
It was more the question of why weren't you getting the aroma out in the fermenter, but you are in the keg?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've tried to figure that one out myself. I've tried different temperatures. I've tried at different points in fermentation, from day 0, where, okay, you would expect it to be blown off by the carbon dioxide, but right through to waiting until the beer is fully fermented, then dropping the temperature and putting the dry hops in then. None of that really seemed to make much difference. I used both pellet and leaf, and it just didn't last. That aroma was gone. Any that I did get went very quickly. So by the time it got to a competition or a beer swap, it was just not aromatic. It might have lots of hop flavor from the hop stand, but not so much the aroma.
How many hops are you using? I jest.
3. That was actually more seriously. I mean, there was, for some of the more hoppy beers, I might have had 100 grams in the dry hop, maybe 150 grams in the dry hop. But in the keg hopping, I don't use any more than about 40, between 40 and 50, because after that point, the leaf hops swell and you don't get any more benefit, because by that time you've stuffed this hop spider to the gunnels. So yeah, it's between about 20 and say 50 grams, might be just a little bit less.
And does it kind of remain like that fresh hop aroma that you're after during the keg?
Yes, for quite a long time. As I say, it starts a bit grassy, and then the grassiness fails, or fades away rather, and more of the hop aroma is kind of, it's a more neutral hop aroma rather than a grassy or kind of harsh hop aroma. And it works well. In fact, the butterfly effect got second place in one of the competitions recently, and in one of the forum, my kind of online forum competitions, it was the most aromatic beer that was submitted. So from the feedback in competitions and bottle swaps, it seems to work well. Certainly better than dry hopping has for me in the past.
So you're doing keg hopping instead of dry hopping entirely?
Yeah. I guess that the other advantage, of course, is that I'm not opening the fermenter as much for dry hopping, and so maybe there's an improvement in terms of oxidation, avoiding oxidation. Although on the converse, of course, leaf hops can trap oxygen in between the cones, and so in theory I could be putting oxygen into the keg, which would be the worst place to put it, really, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
Okay. And how are you getting, so corny keg, right? Are we talking?
Yes, a corny keg.
So you're doing the star sand purge thing and then dropping the kind of metal ball into the, so you obviously have to take the lid off to drop the ball in and then shut it down.
I don't do closed transfers. I don't do closed transfers.
Okay.
So I've already got the lid off. I ferment in buckets. I then transfer from the bucket into the corny keg with a auto siphon. So it's already open, and then once it's filled up to the level, then I drop, which is a bit of a bugger because the damn things float. So you kind of have to push it
Marbles.
down with the lid while you put the lid on.
Marbles, Les.
Yeah, I could weigh it down with steel ball bearings or something.
Yeah,
But actually, once it's soaked in the beer, it drops anyway. It's only when you first put it in, and it's as I say, tied with a bit of fishing line. I just have a long piece of fishing line in a loop, so I just put it through the hole and then put the hop spider through the fishing line and dangle it down. So it just hangs at the right level, just above the bottom of the keg.
Which hole does it come out?
I'm using
Yeah.
headland kegs, and on the bottom of the cap, there's a steel lug that hangs down with a hole drilled through it, which is used for hanging things on that you're dangling in the keg.
Okay. I've done it once or twice with oak chips, but dangled the not fishing line, but the dental floss out through the lid, basically.
Under the seal.
Yeah. But okay, no, that's interesting. I'll try that. But
If you've not tried keg hopping before, it's
no, I haven't.
It's perhaps worth giving it a try just for interest, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, even if you only use a little bit of hops and you pull them out after a few days, that might make a difference for you.
Yeah.
If you're nervous about the grassiness from the hops.
No, I'm gonna give it a go. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I do it in the keg quite regularly. Sometimes just I've done it quite often actually in the past because I don't want to put hops into the fermenter because I'm harvesting the yeast for the next batch of beer or something like that. So what I'll do instead is transfer the beer into the keg, and I do usually do the star sand purge and then drop a sock of, I use pellets, and again I'll either stick some use some cotton and then just sort of stick it through the seal and the lid and the corny, or other, like I think like Les, I've got a couple of lids on my kegs which have the little lug on the bottom of them, so you can attach it to that, or alternatively I've also got, for if I want to go extreme with it, I use one of those hop canisters, except I drill the hole in the lid of it and use it as a filter for my dip tube. So I can then just chuck all the hops straight into the keg itself, and it doesn't pull them through the dip tube. But unlike Les, I tend to transfer off of that once I've got to where I'm happy with it. But maybe I don't need to. Who knows?
There's a David Heath NEPA recipe where he keg hops, and he's a proponent of, well, it's, if you've got it down at 5, 6, 7 degrees, it doesn't really, you don't get the grassiness or the kind of the vegetal taste.
Yeah, I tend to, even if I'm dry hopping in the fermenter, I take it down to about 12 degrees, but in the keg, it's obviously going in my kegerator, so that's down at like 5, 6 degrees.
Yeah, mine's about 14 because all my kegs are stored at 14 because that's my dispense temperature for most of my beers. And then I use a chiller for pilsners, lagers and the like that I want to get down lower.
Cool.
You've practically got a pub, haven't you, Les?
Pretty much.
I've
Yeah,
seen on
pretty
the
much.
Overit forum.
In fact, there's a presentation on one of the, we did a show and tell kind of thing. And I did one that shows all my stuff. So that's there. I don't know whether it's about 3 or 4, it must be longer than that. Might be 5 or 6 months ago. We did a show and tell, so it's on there.
All right, thank you. Somebody else got a tip? Arthur, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me is basically controlling oxidation on the cold side. So as someone who loves pales, IPAs, and NEPAs, obviously oxygen's a killer. And I've only really, in the past few months realised that probably my first 15, 20 beers I ever brewed were horrifically oxidised because they all tasted exactly the same, all brown with a tinge of purple, but I just didn't know any better then. It's only now realised they were disgusting. So yeah, so like from doing like the dry hops, before dry hops, I'll put it in this sight glass, this big like 3-inch sight glass, run CO2 all through that first bit before a dry hop. Then when I rack into kegs, make sure all my lines are fully purged, and obviously the keg itself is full of star sand. I'll purge that out first. So a full closed transfer of it as well. So really minimise, try and eliminate as much oxygen as possible. And that's just improved my beers no end now, so I can actually taste the hops now, and so it's a much better beer. So I think it's one of the biggest improvements over the past year that I've been able to do.
Which bit of the process of oxygen mitigation did you think made the biggest difference, or can you not tell whether it was purging the hops or purging the kegs or the lines or whatever?
Yeah, I think it was the racking phase, but I used to before use like a bucket and bottles and stuff. But then as part of moving to kegs, I wanted to then go pretty much oxygen free. So, and I'm all but certain it's probably the racking phase. But although I do remember quite an early beer, I was brewing it like, just like a glass demijohn type thing. And I remember, it was a nice color. It's like, that nice sort of probably like 10, 12 EBC type color. And then I put in like, 50, 100 grams of hops. And then within like seconds, it had gone like a horrible brown color. And I'm thinking, but all I did was like just chuck them in the top and just been like splash, And I just, I just never, and at the time I never knew why. And it's obviously only since I probably just sucked in loads of obviously oxygen and straight away, just like, that's it, gone, Yeah, so I think probably the racking phase is probably the best bit, I think, to to reduce that sheer amount of oxygen introduced during like the packing.
Yeah, I mean, I've read a lot about low oxygen and so on, and from what I can gather, the splashing of wort and water, that aeration of wort, particularly when you're racking, is probably the key thing. Say not even bothering to transfer. I mean, the idea of a bucket was for secondary fermentation is enough to kill a beer then. Because from what I gather, any oxygen you get into the process, it'll do its damage there and then. Yeah. And that damage will be continued down the line. So you're it doesn't matter whether wort needs oxygen at yeast pitch, but it's for a tiny little bit of the process when it needs oxygen. And any oxygen before that will affect the process then, yeah. I mean, I'm not into sort of underletting and all that sort of stuff, but yeah, I must admit the oxygenation got us a few times.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say fussed. I mean, I'm not so bothered, I suppose, hot side, trying to control splashing in the mash and stuff like that. I'm not that obsessed yet. That's next year. But definitely on the cold side, absolutely any point where obviously, the beer's going to obviously potentially touch oxygen. I'm flushing, I'll say flushing lines, flushing kegs, flushing everything, flushing the CO2, flushing the fermenter, pushing it out. So,
I mean, on that sort of thing, it's useful to be aware of where if something makes a difference, and if you are bothered about it. For instance, even just milling your own grain. I mean, it's an advantage to milling your own grain is to reduce the oxidation of your fresh product, which sort of makes sense whatever sort of process you're doing.
Mash hopping is one of the ways that you can help to reduce stalling, I guess. The alpha acids in the hops in the mash, they complex or bind with metal ions, which would otherwise bind with oxygen and carry it into the beer at the end. So mash hopping is... Sorry, James.
No, go
on. So I was just going to say that mash hopping is one of the ways that you can reduce the amount of oxygen that gets carried through the process into your final beer. And also a little bit of ascorbic acid in the keg at the end to scavenge oxygen. And one other thing that kind of I don't know but I suspect that something like lemongrass chopped up in the fermenter can help to reduce stalling as well. And because I brewed a beer with lemongrass, I was really curious. I was trying to brew something that was taking advantage of biotransformation. And if you look at the chemical makeup of lemongrass, it's absolutely packed with all the stuff that we look for in hops, but at much greater quantities. And I thought, I wonder. So I did chop up some lemongrass, put it in the fermenter on day 0 with the wort and with the yeast. It didn't really add a lot of flavour, but that beer stayed flavoursome for 6 months, and that was a really hoppy beer. And I wondered if it was the lemongrass. I haven't repeated the experiment yet, but I wondered if it was the lemongrass that allowed the beer to stay so fresh for so long, and that's without any closed transfers or anything. So there was ample opportunity for oxygen to do its damage. So that's something I've got to try again to figure out whether actually it did make the difference. But mash hopping and ascorbic acid, I think I'm fairly convinced with.
And what sort of, are you just using any high alpha acid hop for the mash hopping? Or you
almost, it's got to be leaf hops because you've got to be able to remove it. Otherwise, if you use pellet, it will dissolve and you'll get all that hop material going into the boil, which will add lots of bitterness. So use leaf hops, use high alpha acid and dose it at the rate of 1 to 2 grams per litre.
Oh, right. So not particularly high, right? Yeah.
No, not particularly high.
And how much lemongrass were you using, Les? That's really interesting if you looked into the chemical makeup of it, and it's higher than all of those other ingredients, but you've managed to keep the lemongrass flavor out because it's pretty potent.
Yeah, I didn't notice any. I mean, it had lots of citra and cascade in there, so maybe the lemongrass flavor was kind of, it just blended in. But yeah, I want to repeat it at some point just to see if that does actually make the beer last longer.
Was it like a stick?
Yeah, I got stick and then just chopped it quite finely. I think I used about 4 sticks actually.
In a normal like 21, 23 litres.
That's right, yeah. Standard kind of 23 litre batch.
Interesting.
I don't know whether it's a myth, but I did try it for a number of brews back in the day, and I put a cinnamon quill, about this long, in the mash. Apparently, it's got antioxidative properties. Don't know whether that's true or not. Had a lot of cinnamon sticks. Just chuck one in as your own house style.
Does everything taste of cinnamon?
No, there's no cinnamon. I think with one quill, it wasn't ground up or anything. It was just in there, so didn't have a cinnamon flavor.
And I would just say on all this, I found a huge difference when paying more attention on, as Arthur said, on the cold side than anything else. Anything you do on the hot side, personally, I believe it has more applicability on the commercial scale, where they're worried about their beer going off essentially whilst it's sat on a supermarket shelf for 6 months. Which is not something we generally have to worry about. But on the cold side is just deadly to any kind of hop aroma, and actually even has a big effect on malt aroma and things like that. So beers you think like a bitter or a stout, that you think would be, don't really matter if you get a bit of oxidation in them. Actually, they come alive when you avoid it. And I found that at the very least, if you're bottling, do everything that I would fill slightly high on the bottle, so sort of within a centimetre or so of the cap. Don't fill it to the brim because that is dangerous, but fill it fairly high before capping. Use a crown cap on it because they all have oxygen scavenging liners. The yeast doesn't mop up that much oxygen, and I've also seen stuff recently about people using a soda stream canister and a little regulator and just squirting a bit of CO2 into the top of the bottle to cause it to foam very slightly, and then capping on that as a way of finally purging their bottles before capping when they don't have carbonated beer. Obviously, if you're working with a keg, it's a bit easier because you can fill the thing to the top, and then also when you're bottling, you're filling it with carbonated beer, which naturally evolves CO2, which pushes all the oxygen out of the bottle before you cap it. So it works a lot better that way. But once you solved all of that side on the cold side, and also like things like opening up the fermenter to dry hop, it's kind of usually not open up, chuck stuff in. Don't bother stirring it or anything like that. You're just gonna damage your beer. Yeah, so keep it as quick as possible for that sort of thing, and minimize the oxygen exposure on the cold side. On the hot side, there is something to it. I'm not sure. And then you can see like German breweries doing stuff like they have these very incredibly expensive grain mills that mill the grain underwater, so it doesn't expose it to oxygen at any point. Like literally the grain is cracked underwater. But they cost a lot, like hundreds of thousands of euros.
I imagine deoxygenated water at that as well.
Yes, it deoxygenated water and everything. So there is obviously something to it on their scale. I'm not sure how easy it is to reproduce on our scale, but yeah, try and see.
Can I just ask about that mash hopping? That's been something I've been interested in about. Is that about like thiols? Like, you know, you hear people talking about this, and I mean, it seems like it's very esoteric. But like thiolized products and things like that. I've heard people say that if you mash hop and then do like, you know, dry hopping later, then that somehow enhances the kind of biotransformation for these like NEPAs and like very kind of fruity hops. Is that what you're referring to, or am I
No,
having the wrong mistake?
no, yeah, you're right that the thiols, the precursors, thiol precursors, the bound thiols. Yes, you can get some of those in mash hopping, but actually you get far more from the hop stand than from mash hopping. So it does, but that's not why I do mash hopping. Mash hopping is more for this complexing of the metal ions to reduce the amount of oxygen carried into the beer at the end.
And have you ever done mash hopping on a no boil beer?
No, I don't ever brew no boil beers.
Okay.
I know people do, and they're quite trendy, but I haven't.
I'm just trying to simplify everything as much as possible, and I recently did one where it was basically a mash hop, no boil, and it just dramatically reduced the time of my brew day, because basically if you're not going up to boil temperature, then you have to cool down to pitching temperature. And with two young girls, it's anything that can shorten my brew day, the better.
I guess you could use kits. That would be, that would shorten your brew day massively by using a kit if you can get some good kits.
Buy
I'm
beer.
intrigued, Joel. What was the beer like? Joel.
It was dry and a bit on the kind of
Raw
not
side?
exactly sour, but yeah, sort of. I mean, it's sort of that thing where it kind of almost tastes sour, but it's not quite sour. It feels a little bit unintentional, I think, to people that are normal beer drinkers. I actually like it. I like really dry, quite kind of.
We've reduced our boil from an hour. We always used to do a 60-minute boil, but we've reduced it to 30 for the last half dozen brews, and it doesn't seem to make much difference. So you're saving the electricity and the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think
in fact, you end up with not enough time to get the hops ready, because you've only got 30 minutes to take all your readings and get your hops ready and everything else. So
I noticed the same thing actually. I
Yeah.
did exactly what you've done. I'm suddenly like, oh shit.
Yeah, I
exactly.
know. Where's that useful half hour gone?
Exactly, yeah.
Minutes, you know, it's all nicely spaced out, your stirs and your you know, your readings and everything, and then suddenly you're down to 30 minutes and you're cramming it all in.
But it works great. I mean,
Yeah, it doesn't
I
seem
found
to
the difference.
affect the taste.
And
Well,
as you say,
we've actually started increasing with some of the brews, increasing the mash time, because I
Okay.
managed to squeeze a little bit more out of efficiency out of a brew by just leaving it, say, extra 15 minutes, say 75-minute mash. And because I'm taking regular readings, I've noticed not a lot, but although you see, it's although people say, oh, you know, and the conversion's pretty well done in the first 15 minutes. Yes, vast amount is. I mean, the difference between, say, the first 15 minutes and then 5 minutes later is considerable in conversion, but it tails off, but it tails off to enough that I'm getting a little bit more efficiency out of a 75-minute, and I'm just taking that off the fact that I've reduced the boil down to 30 minutes.
yeah, I think that's a good move. I started doing that a little bit.
I mean, if I were using,
Feels like
say, all lager malt, I might think, oh, perhaps I'll leave it longer and so on. But for the pails that I'm using, they're not creating any DMS or anything.
Yeah, I haven't done a lager boil for 30 minutes yet, but I've done them to 60 and not noticed anything.
Also, saving all that electricity.
Yeah, no. Yeah, joking apart.
And there's less water. There's certainly, you know, there are fewer drips from the ceiling, or you know, it's not when I'm boiling.
I've got a smart meter now, and I know it costs about 5 or 6 quid to do a brew.
Really?
Oh, really? Oh,
Oh,
you've worked
dear.
it out. I haven't looked
Yeah.
at it. Yeah.
God damn it.
I'll have to add that on to my calculations.
I solved that problem by unplugging the smart meter display.
Smart man.
And that's a smart James.
I felt it was using too much electricity.
Exactly.
Brew during the day when the sun is shining, and you use your solar power for free.
Yeah, but you're in Australia.
Sort that out.
Yeah,
We're
the
in
sun don't shine much
UK.
here.
I must admit, I do things like drawing the water in the winter, drawing the water and leaving it overnight, because by leaving it in the house, it goes up 4 or 5 degrees from being in the pipes, which saves me a few, you know, sort of a certain amount of electricity, and they're getting it up to mash temperature.
That's a good call.
So pouring it early, because it's often in the ground. Well, the groundwater temperature, the pipe coming out the pipe is considerably colder.
Yeah, I always use from the hot tap straight into the kettle, because it comes in
Oh,
by the time the thing's filled up, it's like 40 degrees or something. So it's then relatively quick to get it to, if you're mashing 57 or whatever it might be, whatever it is.
67
It's all going
or
to boil.
What temperature do you say, mash?
57? A
I've
kind of
never done
protein.
anything lower than 66.
Don't do protein masks.
Oh,
You know,
That's the fun bit, is the convoluted mash schedule. Doing 40 degrees, then adding another 5 or 10 litres to make it wetter, and then rising it to 50.
make it wetter.
really?
I did that for Mihelis. It's like a 3-day mash schedule. It's great fun.
That's very good.
But yeah, on the subject of what Steve does, yeah, your gas boiler is always going to be cheaper than running your elements. So yeah, if you can run from the hot tap, you're looking at what, 11p a kilowatt versus 34 for the electric.
Conversely, though, it's cheaper if you're making pasta to boil the kettle and put that in the pan than it is to use the gas to heat the pan. But the other way around, when you've got like a huge amount of water to heat, it seems much more efficient to use the hot water tap and then use less electric to get to mash temperature. Depends what you're cooking that day.
Are you not concerned about the quality of the water that's been, you know, recirculating in your hot water system.
Mine comes straight from the. Gone are the days, Pete, where you've got dead pigeons in the loft in your water tank.
Really?
Our house has.
And
You have
mine,
to buy,
mine is the
buy a
same.
little
Mine's the
filter
same
now.
speed.
So,
Mine's the
so
same.
you're not
speed.
you're not in a faulty towers establishment.
I
Then.
knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, well, I had to really.
It's hamster.
I guess it depends whether your boiler's a combi boiler or a mega flow kind of thing that
It's
basically
Sure.
heats off of heats the mains water that's coming in versus a hot water tank, where you might have a dead pigeon or rat or whatever in your header tank that feeds the whole thing.
Yeah, mine
so
comes.
yeah,
Means.
I'd only recommend it. I have done it in the past, but I've got a combi boiler. I wouldn't recommend your hot water. I mean, I guess you're going to boil it all, so yeah.
On that subject, one of the things, going back to your original question of what's changed your brewing, improved your brewing, one of the things that's been a big boon has been I got a plate chiller, and I just got one really cheaply off eBay, and I mean I couldn't believe how cheaply I got it. And not long after I got it, I had a problem with my boiler, my combi boiler, and I opened up my combi boiler, and the plate chiller that I had bought was literally the same exact thing with different, it had John Guest fittings on it, so it fit everything that I was using, but it was literally the heat exchanger off of a boiler. Somebody that was clever, that had been a plumber or gas engineer, they literally just split it off from a heat exchanger from an actual combi boiler. It's the same device. I had no idea until I had my boiler gone on the fritz, and it's quite clever actually when you think about how much heat change and cold change you can get out of a device like that.
Yeah, I mean those plate chillers, they're not specifically manufactured for home brewing or anything. They are quite literally manufactured for boilers. So yeah, they are the same thing.
Can I do 1B now, please?
All right, who has not contributed so far? Let me see. Mark, Mark, you go.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of give a shout out for kegging, really. I know we've mentioned kegs, but it's the time saved with the bottling from bottling. That was the first reason I got into kegging. And then the second reason, or the second advantage I found from using corny kegs, was fermenting in the corny kegs. So it just suits my batch size, because my final batch size is generally about 16 litres. So that fits nicely into a 19 litre keg, which fits nicely into my fermentation fridge with enough sort of headspace above it to, which is another advantage, pressure ferment. So pressure ferment in it as well. So and having the pressure on it keeps the corrosion down, so I don't get it blowing out of the pot bits or anything. And that's a nice little sort of process that I've come to love, really. And of course, then you can do the close transfers out of that keg into another keg. You have got the issue with the trub at the bottom, because the other thing, you can cold crash in the keg as well. And of course, you can just take I just take the spunding valve off and just let it cold crash. You don't got any suck back or any problems like that, and because it's such a sturdy vessel, it's not going to collapse or anything. So I guess the only issue is that you get a load of trub in the bottom. Well, some people cut the dip tubes. Personally, I've left the dip tubes, but I put a mesh filter on the bottom. Not quite the same as you've done, James, with the although I have seen that thing with Hop Spider using that mesh scenario with that. But I did get some little mesh filters that fitted over the ends of the dip tubes. And yeah, you get a bit of trub coming through, but it's fine. So the only thing really that I'd love to be able to get to is to be able to have some sort of hop dropper on a corny keg. Now, some people use bags that they put the hops in, and then they put sous vide magnets at the top, and then pull them off and drop them in, and that kind of thing. So I haven't gone down that route yet, but yeah, if you could get something that was a hop dropper, that would be amazing. I've kind of had a look at trying to get potentially modify a corny keg lid with like a 1.5 inch tri-clamp bulkhead fit in, but drilling the thing is going to be a nightmare. So I haven't actually gone down there. I think the claw hammer supply in America are just starting to manufacture something that's has got that capability, but obviously it's cost a fortune to bring it in from America. But yeah, so that was something that's made my life easy, fits my sort of system, my schedule and everything, is yeah, fermenting in corny kegs.
You have thought about
I've just got some of those you know, those tea strainer things, like you know, they call it like a tea bomb or whatever, they're kind of a big mesh thing. And what I do to dry hop or keg hop is put that, because you know, it's stainless steel, so you can just have a normal magnet on the outside holding that up until you want to dry hop, and then you drop it in. What I haven't figured out is how to kind of pull it up again, unless I do a transfer to another keg. Either have to serve it, you know, and then it does get a bit grassy at some points at the end, or yeah, I'd love to figure out a way to kind of get the magnet to kind of attract it back up to the top above the beer. But I think those are pretty cheap. I mean, you get them for $5 or something like that, even cheaper on eBay. Basically, just like you know, what people use for loose leaf tea.
Yeah, you can get the big ones that Les was on about for like £7 off AliExpress, and they can hold 50 grams of hops. I was going to say, have you thought about trying floating dip tubes?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yes, I do use a. That's the other thing. I've got the keg lid. What I've done is I've got keg lids with the extra gas post in the lid. But the idea is for that to use a carbonation stone, but instead of using the carbonation stone, I put the floating dip tube on that. So I've got the normal dip tube with a filter in it, and then I've got the floating dip tube on the gas post. So obviously you've got to use a gas disconnect, but it's the same. It's the same thing. So the advantage with that is sometimes the floating dip tube might get caught. The little ball might get caught between the dip tube and the side of the keg or something like that, or somehow it starts sucking in CO2 instead of beer, and you've always then got the option of using the original dip tube to get the work.
We recently added some weights to our floating steel balls and the floats, because we were finding sometimes when purging it with CO2 that the ball was ending up on top of some foam. So we had a few beers that were pain trying to pour.
Yeah, those floating dip tubes do need a washer on them. If you're taking a lot of beer off out of a keg all at once, I've found that you end up with the keg slightly, as the pressure decreases, unless you're careful, you get a little layer of foam forming in the keg, which is enough to get the dip tube to float above and then just draw off gas, which is a pain.
Do you have any little filter bits on the end of the dip tube?
I've never bothered with those. I've never had a problem. I mean, those dip tubes were they were a little bit of a game changer themselves. When we first started using those with very hot, there's sort of anything that was at the bottom, because mainly because we're naturally carving, so we're naturally carving in the keg. So I'm sticking in a certain amount of sugar at kegging, and so you were always getting a little bit of rubbish at the bottom. So
Yeah.
those were a game changer, but I've never used the actual. I imagine that the filter acts as a weight itself.
Yeah,
Whereas
that's exactly it. Yeah, and it's got slightly different attachment points as well.
Yeah.
So that I think that helps with keeping it lower. So yeah, rather than using the washer, I've got those. Yeah, I've never had a problem with crap in the bottom of the keg, but yeah.
Do you get any rubbish on the filter?
No.
No, right, yeah.
No. I don't ever like dry hop in the keg or anything like that.
I think I was just too mean to spend the 70 pence on a filter. I thought
I was ordering some stuff from Kegland on AliExpress. It's like, oh, they look nice. Click, click, click.
It works kind of
I
both
also
ways.
looked at AliExpress on the price of some stainless steel washers and thought, I'll go for those. Oh yeah, so yeah.
It works kind of both ways. So it weighs it down and does keep some of the crap out as well.
Yeah.
And also, I think as Joel was saying, if you attach it in the mid, I've worked out if you attach it in the middle, it works kind of the best. Otherwise, if you attach it at the end, it
it goes a bit
too
too
much
high.
or pokes out too little.
Yeah.
As someone else said, you just get CO2 being transferred into your cake instead of beer.
Yeah, because I kind of went all in on the floating ones. I actually cut all of my dip tubes on the cornies, and I've just got floating ones now.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing with fermenting in the cornies is using the ice spindle as well to see where you are, because that's another thing, because you can't see inside it. And then I found it's amazing just to see where the fermentation is finished, and also it gives you the temperature readout as well, which is really useful.
Quite the system you've got, Mark, with all of that together. That's good.
Is it Brew Tools have just bought out some kegs that you can?
Like a uni tank affair. But
have you seen the price of them?
Yeah, and the problem with that is you need so much space below it to be able to put extra bits and bobs on to get the trub out and all that sort of stuff. You need them, and they've come with this wall bracket, haven't they? And so it's like you hang it on a wall, but how are you going to get temperature control if you're hanging it on a wall?
I'm a big fan of kegs in general. I won't say much more about it because I get told off occasionally for talking about kegs too much. One thing I will say is on kegs is that if you are unable to have CO2 and cornies and all that sort of stuff, the budget plastic keg is actually still a really good option for keeping beer and keeping it, and the stuff we talked about earlier on about like hopping in the keg and stuff like that, you can do in that. Somebody I got into brewing not long ago does a very nice clone of Ghost Ship, and yeah, he does it using a sort of a budget plastic keg, with he chucks a few hops into the actual inner sock with a marble in it to weigh it all down into the keg, and comes out fantastically hoppy, really great beer. So those are another great way of doing it. And again, you're sort of, if you fill the thing up to the top from the fermenter with a very little headspace, you're actually you're minimizing oxygen exposure as well. So it's a great way of doing it compared to bottling. A lot easier as well, a lot quicker. So I'd highly recommend that if you've obviously you need to keep it somewhere relatively cool, which most of the year is not a problem in the UK if you've got a garage or a shed or something like that, apart from for a few summer months.
I've just managed to get my hands on one of the Kegland Oxbar kegs. I don't know if you've seen those. So I'm going to have a little bit of an experiment with that. I bought the tapping head off AliExpress, and I thought I'm bound to be able to get the keg to fit this. And of course, it's a different thread size. So and it was like, if you wanted to import the Oxbar keg, I think it was like about 27 quid postage. So I was like, forget that. But Brew Keg Tap just had a load in, so yeah, I've got the Oxbar 8-litre keg now.
So that's the big pet bottle, the big 8-litre, right? Yeah, that looks like a quite nice system if you were doing that sort of rather than buying a corny keg. That looks like quite a nice little setup.
Yeah, those sold out in about 24 hours, didn't they? You have very
did,
quick fingers to get.
mm.
What about mini kegs? I've been thinking about reusing mini kegs, like sort of thing where you get, you know, like a 5 liter. I don't know. Adams does a lot of different people do those.
I've done that.
Has anybody experimented with that? Have you done it?
I've done it a couple of times with a bitter that I wanted to put through a hand pump, and I didn't want to have 19. So I was doing it for a party, so I wanted to have enough to pull through.
Yeah, that's exactly the sort of situation.
And
You want to have a party, you don't want to do, you know, so much and then have it left over, and if it's not going to keep as well.
Yeah,
I really
I've still got a one full of a 5-point clone that I did in the summer that's in the fridge. I just put some sugar in it and left it. So I need to crack that one soon.
Can you get replacements?
Tell you how
for, like,
how well it lasts then.
How much pressure can it take?
And stuff?
Sorry?
Can you, so if you're going to do that with them, can you get replacements for like the tap and everything? Because I always find I break them.
I built I saw on YouTube, I built like a dip tube that pushes through the top bung with a couple of disconnects on, so I can serve under CO2 if I want with those. So I don't actually use the tap bit, and you can buy the replacement bung.
Yeah,
the top of it's dirt cheap. I think.
How much pressure can it actually take? Because I've heard people say,
amount.
"Oh, it can't really take." Okay, because that's why I suspected. You know, these sort of things, they're always over-engineered, but then they say, "Oh, it's only good for cascale, or it's only good for, you know, whatever."
Yeah, I think
I mean, I'm not going to do something super like I don't know, like a bit beer or something that's like 5 volumes or something like that. But
yeah, well, with this one, I put in enough sugar to carb it to about 1.5, 1.8 volumes, and it seems to be okay. It didn't explode on me, at least. I think the bung would just pop out if it was too
okay.
much. So
That's not a big risk, is it? Good.
Yeah.
If you have the link to that YouTube video, that would be super useful, actually.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them. It's quite easy. I just made it with like a 1/4-inch T-piece, and you can put a dip tube through it, and screw a disconnect onto the top of it, and then screw a disconnect onto the other side, and you have a 1/4-inch nipple coming out, and that nipple.
Those are just like ball lock disconnects.
Sorry, yeah.
Just like normal corny. Yeah, so basically you're treating it as if it's a normal vessel, and you're just putting in the holes for.
So I've got a couple of them. The thing I use it most for is actually cleaning lines, and just because you can chuck cleaner in it and push it through quite easily. So I end up using it for that more than conditioning or serving.
Sounds very resourceful. I'll have to look into it.
Has anybody else got any additional ones, or until I go back to, or do I go back to Peter for his 1B?
I think mine, I've kind of echoing what Mark said, moving from a bucket to something that I can, if I need to, use under pressure. So when I bought my all-rounder, that certainly changed the quality of the beer I was producing, because there's less oxygen involved in the transfer, but also it made it more fun, because it's easier to use. It's dead easy to either connect it up to a keg full of star sands, so just the fermentation will push it out, and you've got an empty keg full of CO2 ready to accept the beer. And just opening the fridge and looking at the yeast going mad is great. always that always amazes me, just how angry the yeast is once it gets going. But I think that for me, it did improve the quality of the beer. I think moving from extract to all grain was the biggest jump in quality, in terms of losing that the kind of the homebrew twang, as it were, disappeared after a couple of all grains, when I sorted out my fermentation a bit better. but it's just, it makes the process easier, simpler, and it's just a joy, isn't it, watching yeast. So I think that for me was the changer. And then for the few times I've tried to repeat a brew with only subtle changes to it to try and home in on something, I think that again is a good method of improving your beer. So, you know, using the same malt bill but a couple of different hop combinations until you find the one you like. That sort of thing.
I was actually waiting to go around again before I was going to say the same thing of iterating on a single recipe will teach you a massive amount. So for the first sort of 90 or so brews that I ever did, I was all over the place. And then much more recently, I've come back to a few brews that I really like having on keg. And so I tend to sort of rebrew them relatively regularly. And it's teaches me a lot because I am only changing one thing at a time. And then when I change that one thing, I know exactly what that's done to the beer at the end of the day because I'm so used to what the beer is normally like. Last weekend I did my American stout, and what I've changed in it this time, I've made it every other time. I made it with Sabro hops, which I really like, which just works really well in the stout, the coconutty notes. But this time I asked for some opinions as to what else I could put into it, so I'm trying it with some Chinook and Galaxy. So we'll see how that turns out. I'll probably bring it to a meeting soon as well.
Excellent. Hopefully not the September one.
Hopefully not. Well, we'll see. And then I'll blame Ken if I do.
I'm still relatively new at brewing, so I'm only about 25-30 batches in, so I'm still trying lots of different things to see what I like, really. But yeah, definitely when I've done a series of, I did like 3 or 4 West Coasts and 3 or 4 lagers that I've just, you know, changing a few things each time. It does definitely improve the beer.
I would change as few things as possible each time, like change the yeast or change the hops or change a bit of the malt, and you'll eventually you'll learn what differences that makes.
Yeah, that's what we do. We've got about 5 recipes which we just tweak each time, and mostly changing the hops, occasionally just swapping out a sort of 100 grams of a malt to a different one, upping one and lowering another. But it's more or less, you know, we just stick to those 5 recipes.
I mean, there've been a couple of times where I brewed exactly the same beer, literally the same recipe, because unless you actually do that, you're not going to know whether you've got complete consistency. You know, if you don't tweak anything, then just thinking, did that, you know, look at the notes. And that was the other thing I was going to say that no one had mentioned is note taking. I mean, we all know it's important, but it's which bits of that make a difference, because you can get some brewing software where you're putting in, recording this and that and so on. But by taking scrupulous notes of your beers, so that you've got, when you do brew something that you think might be the same, look at your brewing notes and see, were your tasting notes the same, and so on. So I'd say one thing that I found really useful was taking good notes of all the brewing process.
Yeah,
so you
absolutely.
can go back and say, well, what was it? And, you know, that was sometimes with the ice spindle, say, of being able to look at it and think, I can see what happened there. It was a long, say, a lag on the yeast taking off, and thinking, right, what happened there? I underpitched. I can see exactly what happens with that beer, why that one's different to that one.
I think that it's really valuable making those kind of notes. And the other thing that you said about brewing the same beer 2, 3, 4 times, even in a row, but the exact same thing to get it to see what the consistency is, or see where you might be.
No, of course, you'd be doing that a lot.
I was going to say that was on my list. Like, not everyone necessarily has the luxury to, like, you know, brew the same thing every 2-3 weeks or something like that. but it was exactly what you were saying. The trying to nail the consistency of exactly the same recipe and tasting them side by side takes quite a long time. It's taken me quite a long time, at least, to realize how much of a difference a little tweak makes to it. And it's always tempting just to go, oh, what if I just try it this way this time? It's like the willpower to say, no, don't. Do it exactly the same way and then see if you've got something comparable. It takes a bit of willpower, but it's really valuable to be able to nail it and know how little you need to tweak it to screw it up.
Well, it might be that by brewing exactly the same beer twice, and if they're not the same, it might show up an inconsistency which you'd never seen before and thought, well, hold on a moment, I've got that right and got that right. Ah, hold on a moment, my strike temperature, that was a bit of iffy there. That must be it, or whatever. Being able to nail something and think, oh, well, I didn't even think that was relevant originally, or didn't know that aspect of it made a huge difference. You know, it could be a pH, mash pH or something, and suddenly you realise, right, that's the one thing that was different there.
When you brewed that same recipe again and again, actually as well, when something comes up like I had one version which had some ropey hops, which I didn't know they were not good. I brewed it and I was like, this is not the same beer. It tasted it didn't taste right. And if I put, this was my American stout again, the hops I put in instead of the usual Sabro coconutty and grapefruit and the like you get from it, it came across a bit blackcurranty. So I was like, yeah, that's entirely the hops in there, and they come from a different supplier. So to where I previously used, so I pretty certain I know what had happened there. But also, like, even minor changes in the mash temperature had a big effect, down to even the hop presence. By changing the mash temperature by a couple of degrees, it attenuated a bit more or a bit less, and yeah, I got a different hop presence as well from the dry hop. So yeah, it's worth iterating on recipes.
Yeah, and it's interesting that say the quality of the hops might not have shown up as being the problem if you had too many other variables. You wouldn't have been able to necessarily hone in on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you think, oh, hold on, that's the thing. And say quality of a hop is quite an extreme variable or whatever. You know, it's you're really nailing something there where you might be questioning whether which malts you were using. You know, that's you know, if you're noticing those sort of differences in your beer, then that's useful.
I'm going to go to Peter now. Peter, what was your 1B? I see you've been waiting there very patiently.
Yes, well, I 1B, it sort of builds a bit on what Joe was saying. The feedback that I got from entering competitions across nearly all of my beers were that they were undercarbonated, and I'd always considered that I don't like. This is a gross generalization, but there are certain styles that are supposed to be very effervescent, but the sort of styles I was entering were just supposed to be properly carbonated. And I'd been forced carbonating in the keg, and I wasn't getting and this is weird. I know it sounds weird, but I wasn't getting the sort of depth of carbonation. It was just not quite right. And I tried different methods. I'd force carb, very high pressure, short period of time, shake the keg, do all that stuff. I set it to the correct, according to the temperature of the fridge and, the desired whatever. And again, that didn't quite come out right. It wasn't till I got an all-rounder and started spunding. I've only fermented under pressure a couple of times, and I wasn't entirely convinced by what it was giving me. I don't need. Everybody's talking about the need for speed. I don't need for speed. What I want is elegance. I want finesse. And what I found with the spunding valve, along with the eye spindle that's telling me where I am in terms of gravity, how many points I've got to go. I know from previous batches, different yeasts, different profiles. And what it's meant is that I've been able to dial in the right carbonation. So I can pull a pint off the all-rounder after it's finished fermenting, or possibly where it's not quite finished fermenting, and be assured that it's got 2 volumes, 2.5, whatever I want it to be. And I'm coming back to that consistency. The beers that I've entered into competition since I've had the all-rounder, which have been relatively few because of the dreaded C thing, they've not been pinged for being undercarbonated. They've had that roundness of carbonation. And I think partially with the all-rounder, with the closed transfer that you can do, and spunding, you're capturing whatever those ethereal esters and hop products within a closed system. So once you've locked it down for spunding, and you've got a couple of points to go on your terminal gravity, I think it's the difference between natural and artificial. And for me, I like the natural carbonation that the spunding gives me, and the all-rounder has been a bit of a game changer for that for me. So that was my 1B, and very much agree with what Joe was saying. I thought he was going to spoil my thunder, but no, he just veered around a bit. He had about 6 in his one, but yeah, never mind. So yeah, spunding, control, carbonation, 1B. Good.
There's
Thank you,
something
Pete.
like I've heard it described as like a finer, as you're saying, like a finer carbonation somehow. It's quite hard to put your finger on, but I know the thing you mean a bit.
You know, well, I guess most of you are judges. You look at some beers when they're poured, and let's say the glassware or the serving stuff is pretty clean. You get that head that's got big bubbles, as opposed to those really fine. Is that big bubbles or little bubbles, James?
Hang on a minute. I need to unblur my background. This is the fine bubbles.
Yeah, that's not bad. That's not
Yeah.
bad. I'd pay that. Yeah.
Nice.
And that's the sort of, and that changes the mouthfeel to the beer as well. So correct carbonation of beer, particularly for competition, it doesn't matter too much if you're just quaffing, I don't think. But for competition, yeah, it makes a big difference. So, yeah. So how was that carbonated, James?
Keg, force carbonated with CO2.
I've got the same.
Good lacing. Give you a tick on that one.
Again, it's just force carbed.
Yeah.
Nice lacing.
See, we've always naturally carbed. Well, used not spunding, but
That's ours. I don't. It's not in focus, is it?
But anyway, yeah, we've always naturally carbed using sugar.
We force carbed a couple of times when we got a party coming up and we needed the beer pronto, but 90% of the time it's naturally carbed.
So like 30 grams of sugar in the keg or something like that, or whatever it is.
Oh, 120.
Is it? I don't know. I've never done it. Obviously.
Sorry, we do a 25 litre batch and it's about 110, 120.
Yeah.
So it's usually a 5 litre or a 4 litre keg and a 19 litre.
I mean,
So
it's aiming
split between the two.
aiming for sort of 2.2 volumes, probably 2.3. I mean, I'm not into desperately carved up beers anyway.
I am.
Yeah, right.
It always interests me with Kernel beers because they're all bottle conditioned, aren't they? And they
Yeah.
bang out billions of the things, and they're all, as far as I can see, like perfectly carbonated to style for all of them. So they must have that incredibly accurately nailed, I guess, because the carbonation on those when they into the glass is amazing. It's really nice and full, and as you say, Pete, the mouthfeel and how you guys are saying it's got a finer carbonation than if you.
Well, the sugar's mixed with boiled water, so we use a pipette to put it in to get the accurate amount.
Per bottle.
It used to be bottles. We got sick of that. It's now kegs, a 19 litre and a 5 litre or a 4 litre, depending on what we think's in there.
Yeah, it was a biology dropping like a hand pipette, but that goes into the idea of how kegging changed my life as far as brewing went as well. That giving up bottling was.
Yeah, we have this really expensive Kappa, Italian Kappa, that's just sat in its box for probably a couple of years now. But thank goodness, because it used to be an absolute pain in the. Yeah.
So Coopers who naturally condition their sparkling ale in bottle, I'm pretty sure that they centrifuge out the yeast, and then they very deliberately inoculate back in just sufficient yeast to use the residual sugars in the beer to do the bottle conditioning. It may be that, as Steve was saying with Kernel, that they've got that sort of process control or something similar, that they know how much yeast is left in the beer, so that they can dose the right amount. But that's a lot of fiddling about compared to setting the spunding valve. So yeah.
What sort of PSI you setting your spunding valve at, Peter?
I seldom go over 12. The beer that I've got my little Duvelacke here, is currently sitting at 11.4 PSI. So that'll give me around two and a bit volumes, which I find's okay. I don't like a gassy beer unless if I'm having wheat beer, that's a different thing. But
what style of beer is that, Peter?
It's a 1980s recreation of a light ale. So it's at a magnificent 2.3% to see how that all comes out. So I want something that's a bit spritzy for that low alcohol. So yeah, it'll be about 2.3, 2.4 volumes, something like that. Yeah, should be good.
So Peter, you're spunding it by at the point to a few points before terminal gravity. So obviously, for anything that you're going to be, if you wanted to dry hop a beer like that, you'd have had to have done that prior to that.
Yeah, I listened with interest about the dry hopping thing. I've more or less given up dry hopping because I've found that the grassiness doesn't suit my taste. If I was brewing something particularly for a competition, which just between us, I tend not to do. I tend to enter whatever I've got that fits a set of guidelines. I do dry hop stouts. I do like a dry hop in a stout, which is very traditional. It gives it, the old style Guinness that in the olden days when you could get proper Guinness, as opposed to this cold muck that they have today. In the olden days, you could have Guinness that went nick, nick, nick at the end. It had a bit of edge to it, and I find a bit of a sharp hop as a dry hop works very well to not quite mimic that, but give it a little something. So, but none of these fancy Citra mosaic-y things. They were more your traditional, something with a bit of oomph. What was the question again?
Oh,
I'm hallucinating because I haven't had any breakfast yet.
no, it was just the idea that if you sponging, then of course that does restrict some other practices, is all I assume. That, you know, if you're gonna, the only if I was going to dry hop, it's then a philosophical thing of, are you going to dry hop hot during the fermentation, cooler during the fermentation, or in keg? So you've got a range of possibilities, and there's all sorts of stuff on the internet about the flavors that you get from those different things. But if I was going to dry hop, I would probably dry hop in keg, simply because reuse of yeast is an issue, and I wouldn't want to, you know, fill up my yeast with hops necessarily. The floating dip tube, and then you can get these stainless steel tea balls. They're literally about this size for steeping tea. I only had one disaster with that. It's got a little clip on the side, and the clip came undone, and all the pellets fell out and clogged up the poppets. A lot of swearing involved in that. Yeah. Was that a lid off job?
That was a lid off. What did I do in the end? I think it was lid off and stick it in another keg.
Right.
With the pouring out of the keg motion rather. So it might have been just a tad oxidized, that one.
Well, it's fine if you have to take the lid off a keg. Then if you sort of take it off and at the same time quickly stick the gas side on and put it at low pressure, so it's flowing a bit of carbon dioxide in there, it just keeps a positive pressure, and it's the stuff flowing out rather than anything can flow in, and you'll never have a problem that way. I had to unblock a poppet when I first made my triple IPA. And obviously I was like, it's like I've put a lot of time and money into this beer with an enormous amount of hops in it, and it blocked the poppet very early on. But doing that and sort of flowing some CO2 into it whilst popping the liquid post off, and I even had to open up the lid at one point. No problems whatsoever.
Yeah, I tried putting the gas on the out pipe. You know, you just change the fitting over, and squirting it back down and having the PRV lifted, but I'd really clogged the thing up. The whole thing was, anyway, just one of those life lessons. So I was interested with the whole hop. I've obviously got quite a good crop of whole hops at the moment, so perhaps I might be inspired to dry hop something in the keg with my floating dip tube. Anyway, lovely to see you all. Starvation is calling, and I will see you on the other side. We're just about to do end of daylight saving here in a couple of weeks. You lot are going on to daylight saving. That'll time shift this to 4 o'clock or something horrible in the morning.
Oh shit! No way.
But if you've got an interesting topic, I might.
We would love to see you.
So we can tell if the topic's interesting enough and you're there, we can tell how interesting the topic is, whether Peter's.
Correct. It'll be like a gauge. Yeah.
Yeah, the Peterometer.
Yes.
The Simonsometer.
Anyway, I have enjoyed these chats over the last few months. I would encourage you to give James a leg up, and I think this format has elicited quite a lot of information. So the next level of discussion might be quite good. Anyway, all good. Enjoy your spring, and I will see you anon. All right.
See you in
Thank
the
you very
autumn.
much, Peter.
Yes,
Cheers.
yes,
On the other side.
Cheers.
Have a
Yeah.
good breakfast.
Has anybody got any other big tips, things like that they'd like to do? Don't say them all, because might need to do another one of these at some point.
I think you touched on it earlier, James, but dry hopping at lower temperatures. So I think it's about a year or a year and a half ago. There are a few beers between me and Drone that we've done that had some hop creep, and even doing the diastole rest, we're finding hop creep in 2 or 3 beers, I think, which is disappointing, of course, when it happens. And yeah, after asking some questions and doing a bit of digging, we decided to lower the temperature to dry hop at about 14 recently. Sometimes it's been 12, but yeah, that seemed to sort that problem out. And I think the reason it wasn't happening before that is because although we're still dry hopping, we just weren't using the same sort of quantities. So it's when we upped our quantities that we were finding a problem.
And the other thing we did was move from ordinary T90s to BBC hops for dry hopping, which made quite a bit of difference. There's just so much more flavour packed in them, and you don't lose so much beer.
Yeah, I've used those for dry hopping too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've got three hops that we always buy in BBC now, which is Citra, Mosaic, and Idaho 7. So
Those are
they're
really
the
hold the
ones we
flavour,
use
don't they?
most often. So yeah,
Oh, no, nice.
Cool.
we got a few cryo bits and pieces, but we haven't moved over completely to cryo yet. Or
Are you buying the cryo in bulk?
from Bath Haas you can, yeah,
Okay.
which is where we get our hops these days.
How much do you buy in one go?
Last lot was 15 kilos, 5 of each of the 3 I mentioned. But we've now got a contract with Bath Haas because they're just up the road from us. So I've got a contract for I think it's 10 of Citra and 5 of Mosaic and 5 of Idaho 7, plus a few other bits and pieces. I think some Galaxy. But you can't get Galaxy in BBC. They only do it in T90s, but we've got that coming up.
Oh, you say you got a contract. Is that like an annual contract or a...
Well, it's the first time we managed to get one. I tried to get one last year, but I missed the boat. And by the time I got back to them with what we wanted, they said it was they'd already got them in stock. And once they've got them, once they've arrived at Bath Haas, you can't do a contract. It's too late. So I had to buy them, just go over and get them. But
So
if you order them before they actually have them in stock, before they've come over from America, then, or New Zealand or Australia, then you do a contract where you just promise you will buy X amount over the year. And you only have to buy them by, I think it's November for US hops, and whatever the equivalent is for for Australian and New Zealand, it's 6 months difference. So as long as I bought them by November, well, I have to pay for them by November, whether we go and collect them or not, is basically the thing. But the price is so much cheaper if you do them on contract than if you do them just spot. I think that's the term, spot, if you buy them just normally. So we'll see how it goes.
Shared buying of, particularly hops. I've bought from Bart Haas just because they have these crazy deals sometimes, maybe they're outdated hops. I don't know. Maybe it's not up to you guys' standards, but I got some Mandarina Bavaria 2019 Mandarina Bavaria, so it's not like fresh. But you know, it's all
Yeah.
cryo, you know, it's all nitrogen flushed, you know, very properly.
Yeah.
But it was cheaper for me to buy 5 kilos.
Yeah.
From
Oh,
them
absolutely. It's so
than
much
it would
cheaper
be to
doing it that way.
buy 200 grams from
Oh, I know.
somebody
If
else.
you add up,
I just bought it, and then I've probably let 3 kilos of that go to waste, honestly, because I mean,
really?
I just didn't brew enough. I mean, it's not gone to waste, but I mean, by now it would be oxidized, right? You know,
Well, we have a freezer
9
that
months
we
ago.
put the hops in, so all the hops
Well,
go
I haven't got a
directly into
dedicated hop freezer yet.
It's a
I haven't yet
commercial,
committed to that.
a commercial gram freezer. They all go straight into that. So
Yeah.
as soon as we've got a bit more space, I will go over and collect the 10 kilos of Citra. But we're nearly out of Citra. We bought five kilos last spring, summer, and we're totally out now. So I've got to go and get some more.
So Jennifer, you guys must be brewing a lot.
We do about, on average, I worked it out, it's about 3 a month between us and Raf. About 3 brews, 3 sort of
25.
we end up with 25 litres, 24, 25 litres.
So going on like what
package.
people have
75 liters of that's not going to get you through 5 kilos of hops, surely, or 15 kilos, no less.
Virtually every brew we do, apart from the Saison, has Citra in it. And virtually every brew has Mosaic, and then we vary the third one.
Quite right. So yeah, I was going to ask, have you guys thought about, even with the change in the law recently, whether you guys would start selling locally? Because you must, going what we talked about earlier, you've already nailed a lot of the things that have made a massive difference to lots of people's brewings, which is doing the same recipe lots, doing close transfers, doing temperature control, all those things that are, you know, nigh on professional brewing, really. Or do you just enjoy still just drinking it yourself?
Jerome would love to open a nano brewery.
Sorry, I don't want to cause a row.
No, I don't mind. It would suit me. It's just, you know, the property prices in Tunbridge Wells are just horrendous.
Yeah.
You know, how do you get somewhere where
we looked at a place nearby where they live, and it was 25 grand or something a year just to rent the space. So
yeah. It was an ideal property. It was a new build warehouse, and it would have been ideal. And it was on the corner of a whole row, so you could have put the chairs out and had a tap room in the summer. You know, put picnic tables out. It would have been absolutely ideal. But 25 grand a year lease is just not viable.
No.
I don't know how breweries do it.
Very small scale.
Well, everybody starts with contract brewing. Everybody starts with contract brewing nowadays.
Well, yeah, there is a brewery around the corner from us.
They keep asking us to take some in, and we'll get round to it one day.
Okay.
But at the moment, it's quite nice to go to parties. I mean, it's become almost expected of us that if we turn up anywhere.
It was my brother's 60th on Saturday in Hackney. Well, Clapton actually, but and we went along with 6 litres of beer, and we ran out more or less instantly because my brother was saying, you've got to try some of their really nice beer, and he got all these friends round, and you know, we just hadn't got enough. We should have taken 15 litres. Should have taken a keg.
I was in Clapton on Saturday as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Not at the Royal Sovereign?
No.
Oh, right. Okay. That's where we were.
No, my girlfriend's in Homerton.
Oh, right. Ah.
Oh, see you there.
Yeah.
Has anybody got any other tips? Anything else they want to share? Any ideas?
I have one, yes. Nitro for stout. Nitro for stout. Bloody beautiful.
I was going to ask that. Do people do for your carbonation? Do you guys get pure CO2 or 70-30 mix, or what do you 80-20?
For the stout, it's 20. It's 30-70, so 30 carbon dioxide, 70 nitrogen.
And you just do that for stout. You don't do that for anything else.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I only use just pure CO2.
We're just CO2, but we do IPAs and NEPAs and that sort of thing. Hoppy wheat. So We
Yeah, CO2 for everything else. You can't use nitro for anything hoppy because nitro strips the hoppy flavors and smells, aromas.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
So how does
glad you said that.
nitro work in your system? Do you have like 2 canisters? Where they
I've got a 6 kilo CO2 and a 6 kilo nitro. They each have their own primary regulators because they're different fittings. And then they go to different secondary regulators for managing the pressure to the different kegs. Because I have 14 kegs.
Oh, gotcha.
Goodness.
But a lot
You're
of places will
mad.
sell you, they'll do beer gas. That's why I was asking, as in it's pre-mixed.
Yeah,
That's
it's
like
pre-mixed.
60-40, isn't it?
Yeah,
Beer
I
gas.
use 30-70, but 60-40 is another standard beer gas. They use it mostly in the 60-40 is mostly used for pushing beer up long distances. So in pubs where the cellar might be a couple of floors below maybe, or it might be some distance away from the bar, you want to push the beer a long way, which requires pressure, but you don't want to overcarbonate the beer. And for that, they use the 60-40 for pushing the beer, because the nitrogen doesn't carbonate the beer in the way that CO2 does, of course. So,
that's so useful, because when I've gone to get the gas, they've said, "Are you sure you don't want the mixed one? You sure you don't?" Because that's what we sell to all the pubs. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I want CO2. Like, why are you trying to sell me this mixed thing that's like half of it nitrogen? But I'm so glad you said that, because I've been beating my head against the wall trying to figure it out.
Yeah, no, CO2 is pretty much what you need for everything. But if you want to experiment with really creamy, really smooth stouts, or malty beers in general, so you could use it for malty bitters and that kind of thing, then you could try 30-70 mixed gas.
I'm
but
very
you have to be aware of some other things. So you need a separate primary regulator. It works at a much higher pressure. So whereas you might carbonate it between 6 and 18 psi with CO2, depending on the beer, with nitro, you're looking at 50 psi as a fairly typical range. And it takes about a month to carbonate.
Bloody hell.
Gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
well, it can carbonate in 2 or 3 days, but that's the CO2 bit of the mixed gas that you're kind of using. The nitro takes quite a long time to get into the gas at high pressure.
It's a smaller molecule, isn't it?
Yeah.
Smaller
And
molecule.
it's not soluble.
Yeah, and it's
It kind of is soluble, but at high pressure and over time.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you using a diffusion stone, Les?
No, it's just straight into, it's just top pressure. But you also need a stout spout as well, of course, to force the beer through those tiny holes. That releases the nitrogen and gives you the head. Nice creamy head.
I just put my first one on nitro, on the weekend, just to start the carbonation the carbonation process. So slightly, a little bit pre-carbonated with CO2, and then I've got it on the 70-30 mix now.
Yeah, you should really just carbonate with the mixed gas, not with CO2 first.
They say, I've read various things. They say take it about sort of 1 pressure, and then add the beer gas. So, I don't know.
Yeah, carbon dioxide is very soluble. So you show it CO2 and the beer will take the CO2 in. The nitrogen takes a lot longer to come through. So if you carbonate and then put it on the mixed gas, you either won't get the nitrogen in the first place because you're at too low a pressure, or by the time you are at the right pressure for nitrogen, the CO2 that's dissolved will just make the beer into foam as soon as you turn the tap on.
We'll give it a few weeks and see what happens.
Wow, so it takes weeks to carbonate with the nitro.
With the nitrogen, to get the proper nitrogen effect, yeah, you need probably 3-4 weeks. 2 or 3 days and you've got a nice carbonated beer, but you don't get the nitrogen effect until.
So how does that work with like Guinness in pubs then? Is that a different way of serving?
Well, they've probably used higher pressures in the first place to get the nitrogen
so it's
in.
delivered.
Yes.
the car ready nitrode, of course.
I
Yeah,
would-
probably
yes.
massive like diffusion arrays and things like that. So they're like sort of
Yeah.
running the beer over something that's continuously
So it's
pushing.
not on the pour. It
No,
comes
no.
in a
They
special Guinness keg.
it's in the keg beforehand,
Right.
and then yeah, they're just pouring it with that. I mean,
Sure.
they could probably dispense it with CO2, and it's just nitrogen's already in the keg at that point. So
Have you bottled any of your beer, Les? Any of your nitro beer?
Yeah, I have. I've run a few experiments with the nitro beer because I wanted to see whether I could enter it into competitions.
Mm.
So I did bottle some beer from the keg, just with the just nitrogenated, same as it would come out the tap. I've just put it in the bottle like that, and I've also taken some from the keg, but had a little bit of priming sugar in the bottle as well, and then left them for a few weeks. And the one that was straight from the keg, without any additional priming sugar, was slightly less nitrogenated, I guess, because some will have escaped in the bottling process. Even though I was using a bowl ITAP, so that's quite a good system for bottling, it was just a bit less pressure. The one that was with priming sugar was more carbonated. You got a bigger head and so on, but it lost some of the smooth, creamy texture through the priming sugar, I guess,
So
through the carbon dioxide.
So when you bottled it, and then when you then opened the bottle for the one that was purely off the nitrogen,
yeah,
carbonated arrangement, what was that like then when you poured it out of the bottle? Did you get the cascading effect, or no?
Not so much the cascading, but I did get the nice rich head. So it was kind of in between. It was not quite the same as pouring it from the tap, but it was not bad.
Yeah.
The one that also had priming sugar in was more carbonated, but it wasn't as creamy and it wasn't as smooth.
Yeah.
So my advice would be, don't add any additional priming sugar, just bottle it as you would with as you would with a normal CO2 kegged beer. Just bottle it. Don't add anything else.
And does that affect head retention as well? Or
Yeah, the head retention is there's lower head retention once it's been bottled. If it comes from the keg, the head retention is good. If you've used the keg to fill a bottle, it's not as good afterwards. And I'm guessing that that's because somewhere along the line, there's been some loss of the nitrogen somewhere.
And when you're bottling it, you're not putting it through the stout spout, of course, either do you. So
that's true. So when you pour it from the tap through the stout spout, it comes through that disc with the small holes in that creates turbulence, releases the nitrogen, and you don't get quite the same thing from the bottle. You can pour it from a height, so you can get a nice kind of rich head, but it does die down far more quickly than it does off the tap.
I'm going to say at this point it's just about 5 to 10. So I'm going to say that's the end of the meeting. So if you had any other tips, then we'll save them for another meeting. I had a couple more to say, but yeah.
That's right,
so
James.
yes,
I'll stay here and listen.
another time. So yes, thank you everybody for coming. I guess like this can stay, the channel can stay open if people want to discuss anything. But otherwise, I will hopefully see you next month if we have some kind of content we can discuss. So yes, please come back to me with ideas of things you'd like to hear about or like to discuss, and we will do that next month.